Welcome in, Falcons fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for more Atlanta Falcons content. And as we continue going through this off season, I got to keep bringing on the guests. Now we have Joe Patrick from 92.9 The Game, who covers the Atlanta Falcons for them on the show today. Sir, how you doing?
Bryce, good to be with you, man. It's getting exciting, It's like we're after the draft now, and we're starting to see the players at the facility and everything on social media and stuff. So that's always exciting. It really whets the appetite. Unfortunately, it feels like now, like it's great to see it. Now it's basically 2 months of waiting until we can actually go and be there physically around them at training camp. Although media will obviously be able to be there for a little bit for OTAs, but it's exciting. It feels like football season's coming.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. And obviously, people will just eat up anything they can see, anything pop. Even though we know it's shorts, it's against air, anything that you can see, you're just like, I love it, I need it.
Bryce, it's crazy. We were there for rookie minicamp. I think I said this on the Falcoholic or something, but I was there for rookie minicamp, and I was just walking outside kind of late, and because I was doing other stuff, and I see Nick Nash, one of the UDFAs, is getting a lot of hype, and I just see him running around, so I quickly just film it, literally just put a caption on it, UDFA Nick Nash rep or something like that, just literally just describing what it was. And I checked back on the tweet like the next day, and it had gotten like 450 likes, which is insane for just like a 10-second clip of a guy catching a ball. But I think it shows just how hungry people are for any football content at this point.
Exactly. And listen, we'll talk about Nick Nash, man. I'm also a big Nick Nash guy. So, but let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to start first. Obviously, the schedule came out last week for the Falcons. The big story, I think, for a lot of people, it seems like, the first part of the season maybe is the toughest stretch of the season. Also, with the early bye week, some people are like, you're having to play every week from that point on, though you have that mini bye when you play Tampa later in the season on Thursday night. Just overall quick impressions of what you thought of the schedule, and I guess how do you did seeing the actual schedule change your opinion of what you think the season would be?
It's a great question because I was surprised when I saw the schedule. I mean, I was surprised. I was fully expecting the team to have, when you talk about that bye, I think that's what everybody was looking for when it came out. And I was certainly expecting them to basically have that week 11 bye or whenever it was. We obviously found out the day before officially what date they would be playing in Germany, and which I think a lot of us had expected for long before then. But once we found out that date, it's like, okay, well, then it would make a lot of sense for the Falcons to have that bye, which would happen in week 11, I believe. So that would have been perfect. And then the schedule comes out and it's week 5, which is as early as you can possibly get a bye. And that is always difficult when that happens. And then I think just by virtue of that, Bryce, like it makes the schedule just feel more daunting because you've got more, lines of games in order, or like, successive games. You've got a stretch from week 12 to week 16 where you're playing, 4 of those 5 games on the road. That includes a West Coast trip. So it's a difficult schedule, but I think it's going to be a difficult schedule for this division, having to go out West. Everybody's going to have to go out West. Just hurts that the Falcons have to do it twice. They can't kind of wrap up those 2 road games on the West Coast in one trip. So there are some difficulties for the Falcons, but you're right that the whole thing, I shouldn't say the whole thing, but those first 4 weeks are going to be so important for the team to kind of put them, in good stead going forward so they can feel confident going into that bye, not feeling like they're having to kind of go back to the drawing board and kind of give themselves a launching point from there on forward.
Yeah. And I think too, you always think about, health. I said that with that schedule, your depth could be tested because you're not. Sometimes, when you have a later bye, you get to say, okay, we can get to that bye week. Guys can get, some rest, get a little bit fresher for the home stretch. After the early bye, you're going. Like I said, that's why people are saying like the mini bye is going to be kind of important because that's an extra 3 days before you have to play again. So it'll be very important to kind of see how Raheem and the team manages guys and injuries. Do you sit a guy out when you have so many games left, or do you kind of still are more aggressive with trying to get guys out there just to make sure you can get through it? So I think, like I said, could definitely be tested.
Can I add one more thing on the schedule here, Bryce? There's like a period of the schedule that I'm really interested in seeing, and that is, unfortunately, you have the bye kind of wedged in breaking this up, but week 4 against the Washington Commanders and week 6 against the Buffalo Bills, I think we're going to learn a lot about this football team and specifically about this football team's defense in those games, because from my perspective, part of what they've done, Terry and under Raheem Morris as the head coach, in transforming this defense into one that's a little bit more dynamic, a little bit rangier. You've got now athletes on the edge with Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr., as opposed to the Calais Campbells and the Zach Harrison types. Although I guess Zach Harrison will be playing a little bit more. He will be their quote unquote big edge this year. But you've got a defense that really has like a different construct. And to me, it is kind of focused around being able to stop these modern mobile quarterbacks that is becoming the way of the NFL. And I just think that type of quarterback is no better epitomized than Jaden Daniels of the Washington Commanders and Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. They're two quarterbacks that are in a little different areas of their careers and aren't exactly the same, but I think are kind of prototypical in what we think of when we think of this modern quarterback. And so it'll be interesting to see how the teams is able to deal with those quarterbacks. And Jaden kind of tore this team up in that game, that week 17 game, where the team could have potentially made the playoffs. They still could have won that game, but they just really struggled to stop him, especially running, taking off and running from the pocket. So that'll be interesting. But then I think you look at those two games, but then you look at other and you just start to notice that the NFL really is changing when you look at all these different teams with the Vikings with JJ McCarthy, the Bryce Young with the Panthers. You've got mobile quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson, they'll be playing, so they've got, there's going to be lots of these different types of tests. And I think that those two that are relatively early in the season are going to be the best evidence we get as to like how capable this defense is going to be against those guys.
And it's interesting that you actually bring up mobile quarterbacks. I've asked this a couple of times, and I asked you, Michael Penix is a guy who ran 4.4, 4.5. He can move if he has to, but that was never a big part of his game in college. But I remember, I believe before the first game last year, they were saying that he said he would run more just because he feels like he has to at this level. Just, guys, you can't just expect a clean pocket all the time. You got to be able to move. And my question was always, do you see Zach maybe doing more QB design runs, or is it more Penix may do more prime Russell Wilson running around using his quickness to try to just keep plays alive and still throw the football?
Yeah, I doubt they will be designed runs, but I think there will be designs that have the option for Michael Penix for Penix to run. I think that there will be plays that whether you want to categorize them particularly as like an RPO, but regardless, just I think there's going to be opportunities for him to make plays, and I think that it's going to be an important element to his game, Bryce, even if it's just scrambling to allow him more time to find a receiver. And I think that it's going to be most evident with this team in the red zone. And I think when people think about what last year's Falcons team was, they think of it as a team that had an anemic offense that was just Kirk Cousins was not good enough at quarterback, and that was certainly true, especially after the injury happened and that whole thing kind of devolved in the way it did. But until that injury occurred, Kirk Cousins, I believe, was like 5th in the NFL in passing yards. He obviously had that big, 500 plus yard performance against Tampa Bay. This team was able to move the ball actually pretty efficiently between the 20s. Like that was not really a problem. But I think that where Kirk and his mobility issues really affected the Falcons was in the red zone, because that's where you need to utilize aspects of the field horizontally, because you just don't have the vertical space to work with. And so that's where a quarterback, when they can move out of the pocket and start to, extend that horizontal element to the concept, then you can start to find bigger gaps and just have more success. And we even saw Penix, even though he only played 3 games, I think it was I don't even remember if it was the Panthers or the Giants game, that he scrambled. He scrambled to his left and took off and, won at the pylon, just like we saw Desmond Ridder do from time to time. And I think that just like when we talk about these mobile quarterbacks, that's a huge part of it, is utilizing it in the red zone to give yourself better opportunities to score touchdowns.
Yeah, and I think, too, that's going to be very important, too, because if they increase that, if you're able to score in the red zone, that will increase your chances of winning even more. I think the Eagles were one of the best red zone teams. Obviously, we can talk about the push, and how that is being perceived right now in the league. But that was one of the big reasons why, and that's why they were able to capitalize on a lot of scoring opportunities when they moved the ball.
I'd say the Commanders also were efficient in the red zone for those same reasons. These mobile quarterbacks give your team an advantage in those situations.
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves with Penix. So now, when we think about this team, now this year is very big, obviously crucial year. Feels like they playoffs are bust. Playoffs are people are fired. I know obviously it's not camp yet, but you said you were around for rookie OTAs. I know there's been some press conferences, some things like that have happened over the last few weeks. When you've been there, Joe, have you gotten a sense of any type of tension, any type of like it's a little bit tighter when you talk to Raheem and the guys about just because of what's coming ahead, or do you feel like it's still loose? Still, everybody's just kind of going through the motions, and maybe you won't know that feeling until camp gets here.
Yeah, totally. I think that the biggest part of it is that it is just the time of the year where you're not going to have those stressors. Like coaches aren't going to necessarily feel those things at this point in time. When you talk to the coaches, they're pretty confident about this team, what they're going to be able to do. I think they're all really excited for different reasons, whether that's, a coach like Nate Ollie who comes in and gets to work with some of these young defensive linemen, or, Zach Robinson, who is excited to, I think, open up the playbook a little bit with Michael Penix and be able to explore some different areas of the field, which he's excited about. But, I don't sense the tension, but I do agree with you, Bryce, that I do think that this is like a make or break year for the regime, both Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot. Now, you don't know, you don't want to say it's like, make the playoffs or they're fired completely, because you never know how things happen. Injuries could affect something in kind of a crazy way. So we'll see how it happens when it gets there. But certainly I think that both those guys come into this season understanding that this is the year they have to put it together and they have to show results on the field. But I would also say this about Raheem, which is that, he is the kind of coach that is like tailor-made for not letting those kinds of stressors affect a coaching staff. I think just like with the general charisma that he has, the way that just it's not even charisma, actually, it's just more his natural kind of energy, the bounce in his step, that he's got, that kind of almost happy-go-lucky nature that he carries with him. That's very different from a coach like Arthur Smith, where, you could really feel the tension, especially toward the end. I think they all kind of knew with the way that season in particular was heading, with everything they had going on at the quarterback position. It was really tense. And so I think that potentially, maybe the coaching staff isn't necessarily feeling like this if they don't have Penix, Bryce. Like if they're, coming off a season where Kirk Cousins struggled as much as he did last year, maybe they are feeling a little bit more tension. But for whatever the reason, I felt like they're all really excited. And I hope that extends to the roster as well, with the players, looking forward to getting out there and potentially proving a lot of people wrong. Because it's weird, Bryce. I feel like people are lower on the Falcons this year than they were even going into last year. And I guess I get that, the quarterback is a different situation, but I feel like generally you would be more confident now in the quarterback situation you have. And I don't know, maybe the schedule does play into it too.
Yeah. And I think too, with Kirk, it was one of those things where I've always said the thing with Kirk when we signed him was the last time we saw him play, he had like 18 touchdowns, like 4 or 5 games. Like he was playing, he was balling in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So you're like, if he can get healthy, I feel great.
He was contract winning.
Yeah, exactly. So like when you think about Penix, it's like we've seen 3 games.
True.
We saw some good. We saw some things he needs to improve. And so we think with the talent, he could be great, but we just haven't seen it yet. Like we can't say, last time I've seen him play a large stretch of games in the league, he did this, and I know he can do that. So I think that's going to be the big question. If he can be what people think he can be, I think a lot of people are going to feel really good. But I do want to ask you, with the Kirk Cousins thing, do you see that? I don't think he'll be a big issue because Kirk's professional and he'll come to work and be normal. But do you see that at all maybe becoming an issue just in the locker room? Do you see that just as any extra pressure on Penix with him there? Like, how are you feeling about if he really is sticking on this roster?
I don't think it's a problem at all inside the team. But I don't say that to dismiss the whole thing as being a complete non-factor, because I absolutely think, especially with the Falcons being on primetime television a lot early in the season before the trade deadline hits, it's going to be the number one storyline for, well, I shouldn't say the number one storyline if there are struggles from Penix. If Penix is just, get us off to a roaring start, there's not going to be much that they could say. But if there are, any kind of questions, and it is a tough schedule in that early portion, that is what the national media will fixate on for sure. And especially, with going on national TV against the Vikings in week 2, they're going to bring up Kirk if he's obviously, if he's on the roster at that point. But having said that, I just think it'll be interesting to see how the Falcons fan base deals with this being a national storyline, while really, I truly think not an issue honestly at all inside the locker room. Like Kirk, for as pissed as people, I think rightly are at, him not disclosing the injury that he later admitted to. I do think that he is absolutely there for his teammates, and especially for Penix. I know they carpooled to work. They live in the same neighborhood. I mean, they have relationships with each other that I think you forget if you're not around them. They go really deep. These are like more. They're not necessarily, you don't want to call every working relationship a friendship, but like between quarterbacks in the same quarterback room working like that, it's a lot of time you spend with, other individuals, and you start to, care for them despite, whatever your personal circumstances are, unless you're, maybe a bit of a psycho, which, does tend to run in high end athletics. So I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but just with Kirk, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think too, I think one thing people have asked is how does this impact their backup quarterback situation moving forward? Because if you move them during camp or even move them in the season, I don't know if anybody feels like the Falcons have another guy that's just like, oh, he could be QB2.
Right.
And I think some people would be concerned, like, it feels like if he goes into the season, we might as well just keep him, because I don't know if there's a guy that people would like to bring off the street to be QB2 to Michael Penix if Kirk did move. I mean, they signed what? Was it Easton Stick?
Yep. Easton Stick.
And he was back up in LA, but some people may not feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think that backup quarterback situation, that is part of the calculus as to why the Falcons have not just cut Kirk Cousins or gotten rid of Kirk Cousins. Because, that's the argument I hear all the time is, why even worry about the headache? Why even worry about the national media conversation when you could just cut him? But he has value as a backup quarterback. In fact, if you go back and look, like most teams are reverting to their backup quarterback at some point during the season for a non-trivial amount of snaps. Like, I'm not just talking about blowout loss or blowout win or something like that. A lot of teams rely on that backup quarterback because, the NFL is a tough game. And so while it is an expensive insurance policy to have, a quarterback ready to go, you don't want that to be the situation, of course. It's not something that's without value completely. And I think that's what kind of gets thrown out. It's almost like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because understandably fans don't want to have the annoyance of this potential conversation happening. So, but that's absolutely the Falcons' perspective on it. They're not going to get rid of them until they get something back that they think will, recuperate them value-wise for losing what they believe is the best backup quarterback in the NFL. And I know people will kind of chuckle at that, but that is what he is. I mean, that's not an inaccurate statement, I don't think, unless there is one out there that I'm not thinking of.
I think Kirk be the best backup quarterback there is, especially healthy.
And so, yeah. So, and so part of that is not just his quality, but it's also the fact that if they were to trade him, they probably need to go out and sign another. And I was actually just looking, I don't even know what free agent quarterbacks are available. Let's see if I can just filter this UFAs. So you got Aaron Rodgers, Carson Wentz, maybe Teddy Bridgewater could potentially be a backup. Tyler Huntley, maybe. That's the level we're looking at. I guess Desmond Ritter is an
I'm there. Stop, man. You just had a whole
stop. Yeah, exactly. But I think that's kind of part of the problem as to why it's not so easy to just move on from Kirk Cousins, especially at this point in time. Maybe when there were more quarterbacks on the board for them to take earlier in free agency, perhaps they could have done that. But again, I think there was just they weren't getting any value for cutting him. They were going to need somebody to trade for him. No NFL team wanted to do that. So that's the situation they're in now.
Yeah, you just work with what you have, and that's what they're doing. So I think overall, I think that situation, like, I agree with you. I don't think it'll be a big deal in terms of actually how the season goes now, if it distracts in the locker room. Obviously, you never know. Obviously, the only way this would cause controversy is if Penix went down for whatever reason, and then Kirk comes in, lights it up, and then people are like, what should we do? Should we trade him? Should we still trade him? But that's a far down the line question.
If that happens, say your blessings that you had Kirk Cousins to come in and be a great quarterback for you if you have.
Yeah.
Because in another circumstance, your season's probably done if Michael Penix goes down.
Oh, so. Yeah. Absolutely, man. So wishing good health for everybody, though, in the quarterback room. So I have a game for you, man. We have a game that we're going to play.
Games.
So a lot of people of the Falcons fan base are very excited about this draft class. I think a lot of people were very happy with them addressing a major issue that's been an issue on this team for years. And also adding some guys in the secondary, like you said, to make a more faster, athletic, optimistic defense. I could see this becoming potentially maybe higher turnover type of defense and everything. So I do want to ask, or I'm going to bring up a rookie, and I want you to tell me if you think he'll start this season or not, and then your reason why or why not. So obviously we'll start with the first pick, Jalen Walker from Georgia. Do you think he will start week 1 for the Falcons?
I do think he will start week 1 for the Falcons.
Okay.
That's pretty much all I got. But I do think he will.
Okay. Do you think that's like, is it just because like he's the best edge, or do you think, that is it because he was for the first pick of their draft class? Do you think that plays a part at all?
Yeah, I think that plays into it. I think that we heard from Raheem already saying that they have what he said, quote, a lot of intentionality to play their rookies. Now that doesn't necessarily mean start, especially start week 1, like the question was framed up. But I just look at the other players on the roster, and I think that I don't want to give away some other answers there to come in a little bit, but I just think that that's where he slots in when I look at these players. I think there's some more untested players or some more like specialized players. But I think ultimately it's going to be kind of a contest between him and Arnold Ebiketie to see who gets to play on some of those earlier downs. But I think that Jalen has a little bit better physical profile to do that than AK at this point, and just better again, I think, against the run.
Okay, that's fair. Fair. All right. How about James Pierce Jr.? Do you think he starts opposite Jalen Walker?
I do not. I think that will actually be Zach Harrison. That's what it sounds like. So what it sounds like from what I've heard, Bryce, is they're basically going to have one of their edges basically be like a tight end eraser. And that's going to be the quote unquote big edge. So that is going to be Zach Harrison. And then I believe Nate Ollie also talked about Brandon Dorlus being one of those guys. I think Brandon Dorlus is going to basically be the understudy to Zach Harrison this year. And Zach Harrison, who should have a much more expanded role. He should basically be a starter for this team along the defensive line. So, but it sounds like that's going to be a specific role. And so that's why I don't have James Pierce Jr. starting. It doesn't leave me without Leonard Floyd starting also, but I kind of see both of those players as being more of your third down specialist, designated pass rusher types. And, Floyd has shown, a track record in being able to do that. And I definitely think that's more like where James Pierce Jr. I think Floyd could find himself in the mix to be a starter, which again, is kind of a technicality because you're going with a certain set of players that are out there. And ultimately, while I say some of these guys aren't starters, you're going to have so much rotation. These guys are all going to play quite a bit, but I think it'll probably be Zach Harrison and Jalen Walker, if I had to guess on the edges there.
Okay. I got you.
I think James Pierce Jr. could actually have the more like productive season statistics wise, especially if we're just going off sacks. I think that there's every opportunity that James Pierce Jr. ends up with more sacks than Jalen Walker, even though Jalen Walker is playing more snaps. And I think it is partially kind of for that reason. The fact that James Pierce Jr. is going to kind of have his moments to just come in and rush the passer without having to worry about much else. I think that's really going to allow him to be so much more efficient in the production he gets.
Yeah, and I mean, he obviously had one of the best pass rushing rates in college this year. So that's people have seen think that he can come in and make an instant impact in that position. So I'll be curious to see, because I definitely think that is something that could happen where he could impact the game more from a sacks perspective, even though he's not maybe playing the majority of snaps. So let's go to now the secondary, obviously, when they take Xavier Watt from Notre Dame. A lot of people seem pretty excited about him, think he could start. They did sign Jordan Fuller as well, a person who has best year under Raheem with the Rams. Who do you think wins that battle? Is Watts week 1 starter?
This is one where I feel like he's not a week 1 starter. I feel like maybe Jordan Fuller wins this one and wins this position battle next to Jesse Bates, just because he has that little bit of, not a little bit. I mean, he's got, pro experience basically. And there's so much for rookies. You unless you feel super, super confident about them, it's unlikely you see these types of players start again, especially week 1. Having said this, I think that with Watts, you caveat it by saying that I absolutely think he's a starter for this team by like week 8. I just don't know if that's going to happen straight off the get-go when you have other guys with experience on the roster. And it's kind of funny because I feel like Watts, when he was drafted, was the one that was almost the most certain. People were like, he is a starter for this team, which again, it's like, I do think he is for the most part of the season. I just don't know if he is straight off the bat. And I think it's worth for pointing out for people listening, like rookies, oftentimes, unless you're like a first round pick, a top pick that's slotting in as a starter, you're basically practicing by yourself and with like the third and fourth stringers. You basically have like the first stringers and second stringers on the field together, going at it with their scout teams. And you've got another field going at it with, that's basically your quote unquote reserves and rookies going at it. And sometimes those only guys don't join the group with the first and second stringers until very close to when final cuts come, if that at all. Maybe sometimes they just get their first opportunities with those guys once they've actually made the team. So I think that will be something that's worth watching as we go through training camp to see if Xavier Watts gets moved in with some of those guys. And maybe it happens because, to go back to Raheem's point, the intentionality to play those guys.
Yeah, definitely. And, listen, I'm sure people may be hearing that. It's just like, oh, God, if Jordan Willis is starting Xavier. Because, listen, he had a okay year with the Panthers, not the best year.
Yeah.
But, like I said, he has the best year with Raheem, and that's why they brought him in. He's familiar with what they want to do. So exactly, that can help him in that situation. But I do agree that Xavier Watts, I think, will be a starter at some point in the season, if not week one. So now let's get to Billy Bowman Jr. Now they've said they're converting him to nickel, and he'll be a part of a very jam-packed nickel contest in camp. Do you think he gets the nod week one at that spot?
Man, it's so tough, but I kind of think that he does. It feels like this is a player that they were so excited to get. Like Jeff Ulbricht's reaction when he talks about, when he realized that they were going to be able to get this kid, you can just see how excited they are. And, so you say that, obviously they're excited about the player. Not easy for a rookie to come in and start at nickel, but when you look at the competition that he's going against, it's not like you have any like real true guys who have like played well at that position in the recent past, and he has to like kind of beat them out. There's a true opportunity there to win. And the talent, he's not going against like prestigious talents who are, former first round picks or whatever. It's, to be fair to D'Alford, I think he's made a great career for himself so far here in Atlanta, and I hope to see it continue. But he's just not, he's a player that's going to always be kind of fighting for that spot on a roster. Clark Phillips, kind of his career looks like it's shaping up to be somewhat similar. And so I think that Billy Bowman has every chance to come in and win that job because of what he presents. He's a player that this coaching staff got to select. He's not a player that was already existing that they have to try to figure out a way to put him in. So they were actually able to select a player in the draft with the traits that they liked and he possesses to come in and fill a role that they have in their heads on this defense.
Okay. Yeah, I think that, that'll be something very closely looked at just because, like I said, 3 guys all fighting for a job. I think one thing is, too, it feels like the Falcons maybe have better corner depth in general this year, which I think is obviously a good thing. And so, Billy, I think, has a great opportunity to get into that role, start week one, and then we'll see. Or even if he doesn't, he may be in the dime package if he's not the starting nickel. So, I mean, it'll be different ways you can use him because he can do different things for him. So now I'm going to switch it up a little bit here. So now we're going to I'm going to bring up a couple of undrafted for you. And I want you to tell me, do you think they make the team? And then if you can guess, where do you see them? Like, are they like the last, like bubble? Are they firmly at a certain spot, and et cetera?
Sure. Great.
So we're going to talk about, obviously, we mentioned earlier, Nick Nash. Got Blitnikoff finalist, Triple Crown winner in college football. We know his strength is great body catcher, great hands, can catch it, has a great catching radius. Do you see him making the team? And do you see him like just like last receiver, or like do you think he could maybe move his way up the depth chart?
I do see him making the team, breaking camp on the 53-man roster. I think one of the reasons why is because I think that if you cut him, I think that there's a great opportunity that you lose him and another team wants to store him on their roster. Maybe it's a team that's not even, looking to compete as hard this year and they're looking more for the future. He would be an option to select. And the reason why I think the Falcons like Nick Nash and why I like the idea of Nick Nash is that to me, he feels like a more classic kind of Drake London clone, like a Drake London understudy, and to have a player like Drake London who he can model his game after, because he's not the fastest guy. He needs to work on his getting off the line, breaking those jams and stuff. But he's got great tools, and he's got body size. He can fight for the ball. He can kind of box guys out in that respect, and I think he can be a pretty solid blocker. And I think that what the Falcons probably like about him is the fact that he's only been playing wide receiver for a few years now shows that he's kind of a quick study and can pick it up and understand. He just has natural athleticism and like awareness of space and how to manipulate it. And that gives him value as a football player on offense, as an understudy to Drake London, as a special teamer for sure. And but I would say, to the second part of your question, wouldn't see him kind of in this first season kind of really escalating to getting a ton of playing time, to be honest, outside of special teams.
I was interested because like some people have been like, I mean, you look at Casey, you look at Cordero, you look at guys like that, and you're like, are you sure he can't beat this guy, even though Hodge has very importance on special teams. And so, I mean, I've even heard some people think he can maybe even battle Ray for the wide receiver 3. I think it's just
Nick
one of
Nash?
those. I think, I think some people are just really high on him.
Yeah, I know. People are really high on him. I think that he's like, I say Kadero Hodge is like above him in the pecking order, and then I probably put Nick Nash right there. And I think that it's kind of almost between him and Casey Washington. I think they're going to kind of be in a battle for the pecking order spot. But I basically see Nick Nash as basically being a better version of like what Chris Blair was for this team last year, who was a practice squad guy and would kind of be elevated at times. We saw him elevated when Michael Penix kind of came up and made his first start. But I think that Nick Nash just fits what Drake London is a little bit better, so that you have a little seamless replacement there if you ever need it.
Okay. That's fair. All right. So next guy got a lot of hype as well. Kobe Bryant. A lot of people were shocked that he was not drafted. People thought he was going to be at least a high day 3 guy. Some people have kind of been like, hey, he could maybe. I mean, some people have already tried to point him as like the other opposite starting corner. I was like, let's calm down, everybody.
Yeah.
But what do you think he makes the team, and where do you see him being on the roster?
This one is tough. And I think this is the one that could go. It's like the most volatile in terms of the outcomes here. I think there's like, outcomes where this is like spectacularly positive for the Falcons and Kobe Bryant, and he's able to really elevate, I think, this defense with a lot of his personality, to be perfectly honest. But I think that personality is potentially, it has a way to go south and could, find yourself off the team completely because, it just, whether it creates friction with teammates. And but I think it's great. And I think that, honestly, that Raheem Morris sees it as great. I think that they identified this as like an area that they just need to be maybe a little bit nastier, just a little bit more of like fire breathers. And I think that Kobe Bryant is a guy who can potentially help contribute to that kind of attitude, I guess, on a defense. It's hard for me to say much about like his ability. I think that he's in a fight with all these guys, for spots. But ultimately, I kind of lean towards him similarly to Nick Nash, just being like a name and a young prospect that's to the point where he would just get snatched up if they were to release him. So if they do want to keep him, they're going to need to break him in on the 53-man roster. And maybe it's more likely that the team could, they could let D. Alford walk, out of camp and then bring him back on the practice squad because he's more valued by the Falcons than other teams. So I think that if I had to guess, I would say that Kobe Bryant stays. It's an interesting one because I've already talked about this. I almost feel like there's a greater than 50% chance, like a slighter greater than 50% chance for Kobe Bryant, for Nick Nash. But I don't know, like, it's weird. I almost think it's unlikely that they both make it, but like individually they both make it. So I don't know. I'm a little bit torn too, and I haven't really seen them play yet against pros.
Yeah. And I think the question you'd ask too is like, okay, how many corners would they keep?
Right.
If they keep 6, then it's like, oh, okay, I could see that happening. If they keep 5, it's like, all right, now we're kind of getting into this. All right, we'll have to see if he's on the borderline. So he'll be definitely another person that people will keep a lot of eyes on in camp. And I'll give you one last one before I let you go, Joe. Joshua Gray.
Yeah.
He is a guy who I think Ryan Newsel has signed his, tender for, restricted free agency. Some people are like, well, is that something we do need to be concerned about or something? But in general, just maybe even backup center, backup guard, guy who they think can play both positions. Do you see him making the roster for the offensive line? And do you see him being like the end of the reserves list, or like he is backing up someone week one?
To me, he is a classic. Like, to me, he's a practice squad player. So I think that he will get cut. And I think that, based on the fact that he's not a draft pick, makes it more likely that the Falcons will be able to just get him back on the practice squad, as opposed to if he was a drafted player. I think because there's just more likelihood that someone around the league would want to bring on a player like that. In fact, was it Zion Logue who I think got cut in this situation? He was a 6th-round pick, and the Falcons never even got him back. They cut him after training camp. I think they obviously wanted him to be back on the practice squad, but other teams liked him, and so that can tend to happen. And that's a big part of the calculus when you're talking about who makes these teams or not. So I think Joshua Gray is one who they obviously really like. He's an interesting profile because he's like tall, but he's a guard. He's like 6'5", which is kind of like Matthew Bergeron. So I think that he's an interesting developmental piece for him. They'd love to keep him around, but ultimately he's one that I would say is less likely to make the 53. But again, I think would be a practice squad priority.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, listen, I think that's the first time I've actually tried a game like that on my pod. So appreciate you for being my guinea pig, man.
Love it.
I love the answers, and I love just you sharing your wisdom with me, man. Appreciate you for sure.
I did. Great.
Hey, man, let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on X. Oh, speaking of Ryan Newsel, you mentioned him. I actually did just tweet, because you can find me on X at JAPatrick200. Falcons just put out within the last 24 hours a video of like Michael Penix throwing a pass to Drake London, and Ryan Newsel's there watching it. You can clearly see him, so you can check that. I screenshot that and posted it. But it sounds like he'll be back.
I mean, that's what everybody's thinking.
I can actually give you some like kind of like official news on this. So there's paperwork that the players have to file that allows them to participate if they are under tender, which is what Ryan Newsel is. So he's not an unrestricted free agent. He is under tender. He just hasn't signed the deal yet for whatever reason. But anyway, he's out there practicing with the team, so no need to worry about the centers. Anyway, JAPatrick200. On X. That's about all where I am, but you can catch me on 92.9 The Game at very random times, basically every single day. But I would also note, if you're ever looking for Falcons talk, it's probably happening on 92.9 The Game. So there's an app called Odyssey. Just download that, search 92.9 The Game. It's very, very simple.
Yes, sir. And listen, love Joe, love his analysis on the team. He'll be keeping up with them all year long. So definitely stay tuned with this man if you want to know the latest, what's happening with the squad. And hopefully I'll see you again at training camp this year. So we'll see how all that goes. But I think that's about it for the show, guys. Obviously, you guys can follow me on X at Bryce_2K. If you enjoyed the episode, like the video, leave a comment down below, subscribe, everything under the sun. I appreciate you guys tuning in for another one, and we'll continue to get this ship going as the offseason continues to move through. That's Joe. I'm Bryce. We'll see you next time.